My name's John Wehmeyer. I'm a producer based in LA by way of Virginia, and we're on the Pinnacle.
Nice. I like that. Yeah, man, look, I'm super excited about this. For those that, there's probably no one really knows, but me and John and I linked when I went to LA last year, and he was kind enough to invite me down to his studio. And it was just a great experience, honestly, man. We just it's one of my better experiences in making music, even though we made I think we just ended up making one melody.
It was like one melody and one beat. I remember.
Oh, was it? Okay,
couple,
bet. Yeah,
we
yeah.
did a couple of 80s, like Four on the Floor. I did a couple beats that day, and you did one instrumental, I know for sure, and then one melody.
Yeah. So that was a great experience, and I learned a lot in that short amount of time that we were together. I learned a lot about you, and just also I was still learning about how different people did things differently in LA. So tell me a little bit just about who you are in terms of like where you got started from, how you made it, out to LA, why you came out here, and just take me through as much as you want, and then we'll just go from that.
Sweet. I'll go back to where I started music. So I originally was like super into sports, was doing all of the, basketball, football, all that kind of stuff. I wasn't really exposed to music directly. Like my parents enjoy it, but like no one in my family plays. I had one uncle who played guitar, and I like showed interest in that like when I was like 4 or 5, but no one really acted on it or like, did anything about it. So not until I was like sixth grader, so like I guess first year of middle school or whatever, I was living in Spain, and I went over to one of my homies' house, and he had a guitar, and I was like, oh, like you can do that, like no one told me you could do that, and so I like told my parents, I was like, I want a guitar for Christmas, and then my mom did have an acoustic, so I guess she played a little bit, but it wasn't like super serious. And they're like, all right, you can use the acoustic guitar, teach yourself how to play. Like if you prove that like you're going to take this seriously, then, we'll get an electric guitar. So I like learned a bunch of Metallica and like Green Day and stuff on this like acoustic. Actually, it's right here. This acoustic guitar, the steel string. And so I like proved to them that I was down to like take it seriously. So I got a electric, played that for a little bit. Then I tried to join our like school band, which was hilarious because they don't have guitar in the band. But I was naive and was like, I'm gonna join the band. And the teacher was like, what instrument do you play? I was like, guitar. And he like looks at me confused. And he could have literally crushed my like musical career right in that moment. He could be like, we don't have guitar, sorry, dog. And just like kicked me out. But he was like, no, here. He gave me a bass. He's like, teach yourself how to read bass clef, and like you can play in the concert band, playing string bass parts, tuba parts. You can learn how to read music. You can play bass in the jazz band. And so then I started playing bass seriously from like 7th grade until freshman year when I moved back to the States. And then I continued to play electric in school and stuff. But my teacher was like, yo, you should learn upright if you're going to do like bass and want to like do it past school. So then I started learning upright, started studying with this guy, Glenn Dewey, who was a professor of bass at George Mason, where I went to school. But he also played bass for the President's Own. So he was like the bass player in the orchestra that like played at the White House. So like I studied under him on like upright bass and electric. And I thought I was going to be a musician. Like my plan was like professional bass player, win the gig, go on tour, like that whole thing. And then my homie John Trainum, freshman year of college, I was one of the main people who knew instruments, and he was just getting into like production and Fruity Loops and all that shit. And he would be like, yo, John, like let's like make some stuff, because he didn't know how to play anything at the time. He just was doing drums. And so I started like playing on records with him, and then I was like, wait, we could do this too. Like it was the same exact reaction I had when I first like saw a guitar. It was like, man, why didn't anybody tell me that I could just like sit with a computer and like make tracks? Like I just didn't even think of it. And so then that sort of started the last like 6-7 years of like all my time, energy and everything has been like learning how to engineer and produce and this plugin and that plugin and this piece of gear and all that kind of stuff. So I started off as a musician, and that's why in a lot of my work I have a lot of like guitar and bass and even some keys here or there, but certainly guitar and bass are at the forefront because so much of my musical life up until when I found production was all centered around that kind of stuff.
Hmm. That makes a lot of sense, actually. Like as you were describing your kind of your start, that definitely makes a lot of sense, because one of the things that I think you have in your bio is multi instrumentalist, or maybe it was in your Kingsway description. Either way,
I think it's both. I might
yeah,
have
fair.
taken. I've been trying to clear the bio. You know what I mean? I'm trying to make it clean. So I've been like
It's
taking out bits
perfect.
and pieces. But yeah,
No, it's
no,
great.
definitely.
It's great. I appreciate that description. I'm curious on a few aspects of it. One, where did you, or what did you say you were going to college for?
So when I went to school, I went to George Mason, which is like 25, 30 minutes outside of DC. It was pretty close to home, but I was going for music education, actually. So I knew that I wanted to do music. Like I said, I thought I wanted to be a professional bass player, but I knew I had to go to school because my parents wanted me to go, and I really did it for them. Um, and I knew that if I was going to go to school for music, I should get a degree that like was usable. For example, if you were trying to get into an orchestra or Snarky Puppy or like any sort of band or something, you have to win an audition. Like it doesn't matter if you have a piece of paper that says you went to a school. Like you're either going to play and they're going to like it, or you're going to play and they're not going to like it. And it doesn't really matter if you have a degree or not. To teach in a public school in the United States, you need that degree to do so. So I was like, if I'm going to go to
Hmm.
school and get a degree, I might as well get a degree that is directly correlated to jobs. Whether I use it or not, that's a different story. But that was sort of my thought process. And it ended up being a good idea because I graduated 2020 and I was going to either come to New York, uh, LA, or maybe Richmond, which is like the more artsy city in Virginia, and a little bit, more of a scene, so to speak, than necessarily where I was. And COVID happened. And so I was like, well, fuck, I can't move now. Like, I'm not going to meet anybody. No shows are happening. Like, I'm literally, anybody who is working with people they already know because, all the things that are going on. So I ended up teaching part time online guitar and AP music theory at two different high schools for like a year from like 2020 to 2021. And then after that, that really like supercharged me to like, I am going to LA. Like I
Right.
could only take that for like a year. It ended up being
Mm.
good because it was, I had the job to like spend the time while I was waiting. But then by the end of that year, I knew I was even more sure. I was the most sure I had been that I was moving to LA to work on music.
Yeah,
So it was good.
that's really interesting. Okay, so, and when so did you say you did graduate?
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
I
Okay.
graduated
Okay.
in 4 years and I was doing upright bass primarily. So they had me playing like classical, like
Yeah.
double bass and piano, like concertos. And like I was in the orchestra and the jazz band and like all this stuff that's like not necessarily at all related to what I do now. But in some ways it is. Like there's, I still have upright and I try to put it in my productions every now and then. There's guitar and jazz influence and, it seeps in. But yeah, that was a completely different life. And a lot of those friends were pursuing like they weren't even aware of what we're doing. Like if I could have explained to the people that played like what is possible over here of what I've been doing the last like 5, 6 years, like it would be insane. But it's like either they
Mm.
don't know about it or they don't even know how to get into it. Like I know guitar players who would be amazing in our like community and if they so chose to be involved. And some of them I think might want to be, they just sometimes don't know how. But it's just a completely different mindset, that like academic mindset versus like
Yeah.
trying to make stuff and create from the fly and like there's no notes in front of you. What am I supposed to play? Like that kind of stuff.
You know what? That's really interesting. You say that guitar player aspect. Like, I mean, I'm sure there's other instruments you're talking about too with people that can play that would do well in our side of the industry. Same thing with my brother. I remember for a while because he's a great guitarist, and guy been practicing forever, like every single day. I can't remember, like, I don't want to say a single day where he hasn't played, but I remember for a long time it was just all he did. Um, and so I tried to bring it up to him a few times. We sold a couple sample packs together and they did well. This was like earlier on. But it was something where I was like, man, if you want to, like, you would destroy it here, like, easily. It just takes like you said, a few adjustments, like the mindset, and also just, obviously things work a little different, and the melodies, the loops, you might be, having to kind of work in different constraints. But I totally agree. There's a ton of people that have, even if they have a skill in an instrument,
Or horn, you know what I'm saying? Like horn
yes.
players. Like I've had horn players come in and play trumpet or trombone on some stuff, or even keyboard players that know their way around the keys. And if they just understood, hey, if I take some of these chords from this Miles Davis tune that I know in and out, and I just change the key and rearrange them and added my little flair to it, like boom. Like their wealth of knowledge is insane. They just the path to apply it
Yes.
is not obvious to them. And it's funny because we, as academic, like being in that position, we admire those that have done it. Like Miles was the pop shit of his day. Like, yeah, we're studying it now, but like Miles was playing clubs in New York. People wanted to go see his shit. Like it's been 100 years almost, or 80 years or whatever. But at the time, that was the shit. You know what I'm saying? Like even the classical music of that day, like there was riots when Rite of Spring was performed. Like this shit was the stuff. So it's like they admire that, but they're doing it through studying older music. And once I had the like unlock of like, oh, an orchestra is just a 250-year-old cover band, I was like, nope, I'm done. Like once that clicked, I was like, I can appreciate it. I can participate in it. I can learn from it. But I'm trying to make new stuff. I want to contribute to the new music. I want to be contemporary. I want to work with contemporary artists. And that was like the unlock. Because then it turned from I'm studying all of this to be it, or like try to be a walking museum. Because like there's a right way to play Mozart. There's a right way to play Beethoven. There's a right way to play Miles Davis. There's not a lot of creativity. It's actually surprisingly non-creative when you like really get to the minutia of it, because these artists were doing their thing, and it's like we're trying to emulate them to the closest that we can to show people this music and be authentic to that music. But it takes all creativity away from you to some extent, because Miles Davis played horn different than Dizzy Gillespie played horn, that played different than Louis Armstrong or whoever. And so I've tried to cultivate more of like my sound, my style, and like learn from all of that stuff, but not get caught up in like, I'm trying to play exactly like Wes Montgomery. Like I want to take a little bit of it and then run with it. So, it's just a slight different mindset.
Man, that's so real. Even the idea of like, for me, this is huge, because for me, like I don't want to say, maybe not, like I'm super intellectual. I love to learn. I love, like, when I get into into things, I get super curious, and then I want to go into all these different directions. And I think, even with what you're describing, I realize that I get into these weird traps where even as I improve my skills, or I am learning more, if I don't have like constraints or a direction or a goal that I'm going towards, I can easily get lost in, whatever I'm doing. Like what you said, which is learn from it and then take and run with it, on to the next, or towards whatever goal you're working towards. That's such a real thing, especially in music now, because all the resources we have, like you can learn so much online. It's ridiculous, So
well, then you've got those people that will be like, it's almost like a cop out to some extent, right? Like, or you can allow it to become that, because there's so much information out there. I don't possibly know it all. I'm going to take the next 3 years to learn everything I need to know about music. And it's like those people that are like, it's 2023, and they're like, in 2024. And it's like, no, not in 2024. Like right now, bro. Like, don't wait. Like, yeah, there's lots to learn and you're never going to know it all. But like the quicker you can go from learning to application, one, you'll remember it. Cause that's the other thing. Like I got a synth
That's
over
it.
here. I had a homie who walked me through all the shit. Guess what? I didn't apply it right away. How much of it do I remember? Not a lot. So it's like the only way to truly learn is to learn and then apply, because once you start applying that knowledge, you then have reps on it and the muscle memory begins to go and all that kind of stuff. So it's actually imperative that you apply it, because otherwise you're at liberty of, soaking up all the knowledge and then some of it goes right through you because you never had the opportunity to sit down and just put it to practice. Like I literally have this Wes Montgomery transcription. I downloaded it from YouTube. I bought it for like $5 from this dude because I am always down to invest. Like if I feel like you're adding value, like packs, music, sheet music, courses, like we can get into that later, because I honestly think that approach is like significantly helped me speed up the process over the last year and a half. Is
Yeah, we'll
just
definitely touch on that.
trying to invest in yourself. But it's like I took the first 4 chords of that and like sat there and practiced it, and like I didn't even learn the whole thing, but I just like took those chords, and it's like now those chords I was putting them into melodies, starters, like instantly that day. And it's like soaking up that knowledge and then trying to utilize it, I think, as quickly as possible is just a good way to not get caught over in that academic world for too long, but then also allows you to like really soak it in, because once you've applied it, it then sort of gets into your system a little bit, and you're more likely to pull from that later on or remember what you had learned.
Yeah, I completely agree. And that's something I've learned recently too. Like even the application thing, I've always known, like I've done it, but I didn't realize I was doing it. And then when I went out of my way to like really dive into something specific, like recently I've started to, I was going to ask you about this and we'll touch on it later too, but like the piano, I've always played like the keys. All my music has been created through my ear and my feel, right? But in terms of knowing the technicalities of what I'm actually playing, and knowing like how to access certain sounds quicker because I know all the scales and all the combinations I can use, I'm learning that now. Like that's like the specifics of it I've started to learn, but I realized quickly that like I'm watching these videos and I'm playing along a little bit, but to actually like I'm trying to take a new approach now, which is, yeah, I'm learning it, playing along, but actually creating melodies or beats or whatever I'm doing at the time, using the knowledge I've just learned. It's a little harder for me because I'm just not used to doing it that way, but it's way more effective to retain that information.
100%. And, everything's in flux. So you could spend a day learning a particular thing and then make 3 melodies that are based on that, but then you save them or scrap them or don't do anything, and then you work on the melody. But it's like, because you took some time practicing, moving things around, trying stuff, like you may not even send those out. Like they might be exact copies of a particular progression, but just the act of doing that allows you to learn, whether it's, harmonic stuff, melodic stuff. Same thing could even be applied to beats, right? Just like, let me try and get this bounce. Like, I don't know what the fuck is going on with these drums, but they're fire. I need to figure it out. And you just fucking copy that shit. And it's like, you don't need to go send that out or do anything, but it was just like the habit of, how does it feel to put in hi-hats like Monty? How does it feel to swing a snare like this? Or how does it feel to do kicks like this? And, that's copying. That's great. Don't send that out. Like, don't use that. But that will seep in elsewhere. Like the process of making a particular chord progression exactly how Wes Montgomery did it, you don't necessarily have to use that material in that moment. It will seep in elsewhere where it's like, oh, right, I remember that chord where I like hold a bar and the pinky, and then they find their way elsewhere. And it may not be that first application that is the most true or authentic, but you're sort of soaking up all these different tidbits that, like, when you go to sit and make music now, it's like you have all these tools to choose from, and then your combination of those tools and your taste result in like what your sound becomes at some point.
In copying, you can like your style will still come through, as you said, but even if you try to copy someone directly, your style or something in your expression you can almost never copy someone directly. Of course there's exceptions, but especially in music. Talk to me a little bit about, you mentioned it briefly, your when you tried to join the band and you played guitar, what did that look like when you said that? Was it the teacher that held the power
Yeah,
to
it was
to
first. Yeah,
totally
yeah,
yeah, go ahead
yeah.
and tell me a little bit more about that and how that ended up working out.
So I sixth grade, so first year of middle school, found out about guitar, started learning, got a guitar Christmas of that year, played for like 6, 7 months. My homie who like we jammed together, his name's Fabrizio in Cherti. He lives in San Francisco now, but he was one of my first music friend. Like we would jam, he played drums. And I go down to his basement and we'd rock out on shit. And he's like, yo, like, I'm joining the band. Like, I'm going to do the percussion. Like, you should join. Like, it's going to be fun. We should do this. Like, when
Mm-hmm.
you're signing up for classes and shit. And so I signed up for band or whatever. And we show up first day of school and the teacher's walking around like, what do you play? Flute. What do you play? Just like getting everybody's stuff. And he comes to me. He's like, what do you play? I was like, guitar. And then he just like, he looked at me and was like, and then he like was thinking for a second. And in that moment, he was like, here. And he like grabbed the like this ugly, like I wish I could show you what it looked like. It was like this ugly Yamaha yellow, like pastel,
Yeah.
like off yellow, like bass. And he's like, here's a book. Teach yourself how to read. Like you can play with us. And so then I went
Wow.
home and I started like just reading through the book and like learned where the notes on the bass clef were. And like originally when I was playing, like I could only play down here because that's like where you taught where the notes were was like just first position. So I was just like I was just holding it down here
Mhm.
and for the longest
Yeah.
time it was just all right here. And yeah, started playing like string bass parts in the concert band, tuba parts. I would go and play with the choir actually a bunch. We like did a couple of trips where I'd like go and travel and the choir would play and me and my homie Fabrizio would be backing up the choir and like got a lot of really cool experience to be able to just play with different groups, different types of music, different settings. And so that's sort of where all that kind of got started.
Man, one of the things that you're talking about a lot, and you're really like, I found out through you about you, or I wouldn't say about you, but I was recommended to hit you up when I went to LA by Waves. And it's cool to have like that type of connection with people that they would just like refer you and be like, cause bro, I trust Waves. I trust Waves and you know what I'm saying? So when he said that, I was like, yeah, I'm gonna go. I know I'd seen you online and I knew what you were about, but in terms of working with you, we'd never connected like that before. So, um, I find that you're very good and at not only making connections, but you just had like clearly you've had been in the so many different settings with different types of people with regards to music. A lot of people in our side of things can't really, and we talked about this, but like you can't really always see the other sides of things. Like you can't, if you're not aware, you're not in that. It's very easy to look at people in the other parts of the industry and be like, yeah, that's not the way to, they're doing it wrong or whatever. So tell me a little bit kind of as you've progressed, is there any lessons you've learned in meeting people? Like, were there any times where it was kind of, tricky for you to kind of navigate that landscape, or were you always kind of set in that sense?
So I would say I've been privileged to. I think it all stems from having to move around a bunch. Like my father was in the military, and so other than when I lived in Virginia before I moved here, everything up until the end of high school, the longest I'd ever been in one place was 4 years. So before LA, I was in Virginia for like 7 or 8 years. By the end of that, I was like, all right, what are we doing? Like, it's time to,
Mm,
we gotta go. But
yeah.
before that, I was in Spain for 4 years, Texas for 3 years, Kansas. So like, I'm used to having to meet new people, make new friends, talk to different people, can relate to a lot of different people from being in a bunch of different settings and can be a little bit more understanding of different cultures potentially. I was able to travel around Europe a bunch when I was in Spain. And so I'm just used to meeting new people, talking to new people, being open and, comfortable around different people, erring on the side of saying less and just sort of taking everything in. Like, I think being in the room, whatever that means, um, with people, whether it's a production session with me and one other producer, or whether it's me and another producer and two artists, or whether it's me and just an artist, or a group of 8 people, or me getting invited to some session at another studio in LA and there's 20 people there. Like, I think I've been in a lot of different social settings that allow me to navigate some of that stuff a little bit more easily. But I'd say that it's all a learning experience. Like, knowing that every person is different and there's going to be things that make different people tick for different reasons, or they're interested in different stuff. But I think self-awareness is important. Stepping back and looking at the situation and realizing, like, how are people feeling? What could we be doing right now? And I think a lot of that is production. It's like, say we're hitting our heads against the wall. Like, why are we, like, let's go take a break. Let's step out and grab a smoke, or let's go get a snack, or let's, just trying to keep the flow going with people and being open to meeting whoever. Like, I don't set any expectations of people, or what I think we're going to make, or what I think we could do, or what I think I want to get out of anyone. Like you said, I lean a lot on my network and those who are referred to me, and vice versa, those who refer me to people. And I feel like once I've moved out to LA, like, I knew 2 people when I came out to LA. And those are the 2 people I've
Wow.
seen the least. I didn't know shit.
Wow.
Like, in all honesty, I didn't know anybody out here. And
That's
in a
crazy.
year, from like August 2021 until now, I've been able to really lay a foundation of solid people, solid collaborators. I have a studio. And I've been able to really, like, build this little thing I've got going, all off of relationships in the music. And I do this thing where I call casting a wide net. Like, there'll be periods of time where, like, I'm meeting hella people. Like, I remember early on, I would message like 50 people on Discord a day. Caveat, asterisk, not just messaging to message. I would go in these Discords, listen to everybody's music. Maybe I listened to 200 people's music. But if I fucked with it, I would just be like, yo, this is hard, bro. And then keep it moving. Like, not even asking anything of people, like, just showing love, getting in there, listening to people's stuff. And there's people that I had sessions with early on in LA that were solely based off of me, like, reacting to some of their stuff in Discord, and, like, not even really being like, hey, let's work, or let's try and do this, or whatever. Like, I literally was just showing love, going in, listening to people's samples, flipping stuff, responding back. And, like, I did that a lot more early on because I didn't know anybody. There was nothing else for me to do. I literally had no one in LA. So I'd just go on Discord and I'd fucking write to people, talk to people, do stuff, meet people out here. And then it's like, you cast a net of like 50, say you do that to 50 people, maybe 10 people get back to you, or maybe more, but like maybe 10 go into a conversation, and then maybe 5 of those end up sessions. Like, I've had people from Austria, Germany, Canada, like, all come by the studio through Discord and the internet, all based off of this sort of thing of, like, just being around, showing love, and, being available for when people do come to town,
Mm-hmm.
and then honing in on the shit that, like, felt good, like, not over
Right.
analyzing it. Like, maybe we didn't make a record, or maybe we didn't make a smash, but, like, if I fucked with you personally, like, I'd like to think that I am going to, and the other person will want to develop that, no matter how long the timeline is for whatever else occurs. So, there's been some people early on and recently that, like, I've continued to foster. And I think following up with people, especially in a world where, like, a lot of this is on the internet, like, that's important. Like, reaching out to people, checking in with people, seeing what's good, how you doing, like, here's some more shit, like, what you got going on. And really, like, fostering and trying to build rapport with certain people. So it's like, it's a dichotomy. It's casting a wide net, meeting a bunch of people, but then the people that you feel like you resonate with the most, like, diving in with those people and, like, doubling down. Like, people like, you know, my homies Gutty and Limo, or, people in Discord like Corgan, or just different people that I've met over time, but, like, obviously we work well together, or we've done some cool shit. So it's like, you keep in touch and you try and continue to work. And it's like, all of the relationships have, like, resulted in anything I got going on. Like, the internship that I got, the part-time engineering thing that I got going on, like, any artists that I've met, like, it's all been relationships and, like, good vibes and people. And, like, letting things take their course. Like if you meet someone in an event, well, say you see someone in an event, right? I don't force myself into any situation. Like I let the things happen naturally. Like if
Yeah.
I see someone, cool, that's crazy. Wonder if I'll see him again. Or if it's somehow I stumble into them and then we get to a natural conversation, I'll have a conversation with them. But I would much rather see someone 7 times on some good terms, chill, good vibe shit, and then the 8th time finally set up the session than try and set up a session on the first or second meeting because I'm trying to force it or get something done or whatever. It's like, I don't plan on leaving LA. I plan on being here for a while. So there's no rush. You know what I mean? Like, and I think that people can sense that both directions. People can sense when you're like trying to make shit shake and like anxious about it and try. Like I have people that have done that to me, and it's not like I can empathize with that,
Right.
but it's not fun to be around because it puts you on edge and you feel like you can't be yourself and you think that this person needs something from you or whatever. And so if you can just be a good hang, be around, survive enough to have, be able to stay, like it's just time and good people and good energy, and like things will start to happen. And for me, I still have a long way to go. There's a lot that I want to do, but I feel like in this last year and a half, I've been able to do a lot in terms of setting me up for the next 3, 5, 10 years, by focusing on relationships and like how important that is. Because at the end of the day, this whole business is people. Like the people putting on playlists, people signing artists, people. Like it's all a human behind something. Like don't let the avies get you. Like it's all people, and we all need shit, and we all like want to be wanted and felt and appreciated, and all the human sides of all of this. It's like you can't forget that.
No, absolutely. I mean, you hit a bunch of things right there. Like I don't even have more questions about it because you nailed that. Thank you.
I was about to say, did I answer the question? I feel like I went on a rant.
Yeah. No, it's perfect. No, I mean it was all very valuable, bro. 100%. I did write a few notes down. Let's see. Yeah, I mean the Discord thing's very interesting. That's something where I've been kind of pushing people almost that don't like know about it, because it still surprised me even now. Like it's 2023. There's people that don't even know what that is, and they're like they're on the internet enough, and they're in the music industry or whatever. But exactly what you said, like even just building connections that way and being genuine, like it's so simple, but it's so effective. And I find this is one of the things, like if you're not a person that's curious necessarily about like these types of things, like if you're in a Discord server, you're seeing music but you're not really listening, or you listen, you're like whatever, there are ways to push yourself. Like if you focus on being curious, it's something my dad actually would put a lot of emphasis on when I was younger, but it's really helped me in many different areas. There are actually ways you can, if you just focus on being curious, it sounds weird, but you can actually make that happen for yourself. And then when you do that, you kind of realize, oh, like this is actually really interesting. You just need to find what it is about these things that are interesting to you. And I think that is a way to kind of get started if you're kind of having trouble, building connections like that, because once you're genuinely interested in someone or something that they're doing, then all the rest just can flow naturally. When it comes to learning scales, and like I say scales, but really just like, again, I told you what I'm doing. I'm trying to learn, the music theory side of piano. Is there any tips like for producers or anybody that's trying to learn an instrument? And I'm sure obviously every instrument's different, but are there any kind of guidelines or things you would say if someone's trying to get more proficient at playing an instrument?
So take this with a grain of salt.
Yeah.
I have done a lot of stuff self-taught, but I also acknowledge when teachers can come into the equation. So I'm going to pick somewhere in between. I remember a time where I would take lessons every week, and sometimes that's not the most beneficial because guess what? I'm busy one week. I don't practice. I got to pay for the next lesson. But I also think that if you have no entry point, it may take you much longer than if you had someone to help you. So what I've found is like maybe you take one lesson on keys from a keyboard player and you say, give me everything you think I need to know in terms of scales, and then go run with it for a month or two until you feel
Hmm.
like you have hit a wall again. Then go back, pay for another $50 or $75 lesson, get the next round of shit that you need. And it works both ways because they know you're not fully practicing to be a keyboard player, so you don't need lessons every week. But it also allows you to afford, once a month, once every 2 months, you get some really good material. Because guess what? These teachers have all of the scaled notes that you need. They have all the books that you could possibly want. They could recommend you books on players. Like I've got a whole library of music stuff that I use, whether it's like, here, let me get some.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
That's the other thing. Even if you don't want a teacher, I'd say books if you can. Like I know this is all money and stuff, but it goes back to that investing in yourself. Like if you can set aside the time and prioritize, some of this stuff will really be helpful. But like Steely Dan book, right? There's like all of their songs, like, and it has guitar chords and stuff like that. It's like, oh, peg, G major 9, F sharp 7, sharp 9, F major 9. And it's like, yeah, are you going to be able to perfectly play peg? No, but like, is this enough to like be a jumping off point and you can read the chart and you're like, oh, I just learned how to play a major 9 chord. That's crazy. Or like, just like little tidbits that you can grab and run with, whether it's books, lessons from a teacher, listening to music by ear. That's super helpful. Just transcription in general, just like trying to figure out a bass line based on, playing the record over and over again. But like Motown, James Jamerson, like this is the guy who played on like every Motown record in the 50s, all of his bass lines and like history about stuff. And it's like anything like this, you don't need all of it. But, finding the information and trying to speed up the process, like that's the worst is when you think you're like not making progress. Like you're sitting there and playing guitar every day, but you understand you're on a plateau because you're like, I
Yeah.
feel the same. I'm playing the same ideas. I know all the same shit. And it's like, Kenny talks about this all the time. It's like when a producer feels stale, like what do? Download some new sounds. Like shit is fresh again. With
Hmm.
an instrument, if shit feels fresh, learn a new song. Like learn some new chords. Like Kenny talks about, like part of his routine is like learning a new chord change every day. Like imagine if you did that
Hmm.
365 chord changes, like chord
Yeah.
progressions in a year. You know how many chords you would know at that point? And you could do that on
Hmm.
keys or guitar. And say you just learned the first four chords of a Wes Montgomery tune one day. Boom, that's your chord progression for the day. Guess what? Those are four different chords you now can use around the neck in all kinds of different contexts. And then you might learn another progression or another progression, and then it starts to build on itself. So I think a lot of the learning is like process oriented, whether that's like taking a lesson and then running with it for 2 months, or saying, what's the smallest thing I can do on a daily basis that's going to have the most impact. Because it's like you could learn a guitar solo and say that you're learning guitar, but what is going to more directly improve your production quickly? Learning a
Right.
chord progression every day. Like that is a
Hmm.
super easy check. I learned a progression. I can look up a YouTube video, how to play neo soul chords. Boom, learn a chord progression. I did my thing for the day.
Hmm.
You'd be better off doing that little 10-minute practice of learning a chord progression from YouTube, a book, whatever, every day for a whole year than you would learning any solo or, you know, like that's a direct correlation back to the application of learning. Like I learned a chord progression, guess what, I can use that in a sample. I learned this chord progression, I can use this in a starter. I learned this chord progression, I can play these soul chords in a session when they ask me for this kind of vibe, or I know that this progression works with this. And like you start to build your knowledge base of like genre of music, types of chords, how to apply that into different scenarios. So I think when it comes to learning, and maybe if you're in a plateau, is like just finding new shit to learn, new progression, new song, dive into a particular style of player or, instrument or whatever.
Hmm. That makes a lot of sense, and I'm definitely going to be using some of that. What you just mentioned. Um.
And I could do it more myself.
Exactly. There you go. So, you know, you've been in LA for how long? You said 2 years, or am I mistaken?
Not even almost 2 years. I guess what, August, September, October, November, December, January, February, and we're in January, so almost a year and a half. Coming up on a year and a
Wow.
half on the 15th of February.
Yeah, wow. Okay. So tell me a little bit about, let's fast forward. I mean, I love touching on kind of the journey and the progress.
Yeah, let's
But
get to it.
tell me a little bit about the artists that you're working with now, the people that you've built relationships with that you're really connecting with. Because I remember back when I was in your studio, you mentioned a few artists that you were making a lot of things with, and you just the vibe, the connection is just there. Tell me about that and how that's going, and what you've been up to in that regard,
Yeah,
since I've
for
I've been
sure.
there.
For
Hmm.
sure. So I feel like a lot of my music right now is in three categories. One is like the engineering that I do. Second is like beats and samples and sending stuff around and like collaborating in that way. And then what we'll elaborate on is like the artists and stuff. Because I like to have my hands in a lot of different stuff. But the artists I've been working with a lot recently, um, there's an artist. My name isn't J-Mac. He's a homie from Virginia. I've been working a lot with him. I've been helping him sort of piece together projects. I used to be more directly involved with like beats and stuff like that, but now I have more of like an executive producer, engineer type role with him, where like we just finished piecing together his next project, 6 songs, and like I had additional production on like 5 out of 6 of them, co-produced one of them, and then engineered everything, mixed everything, helped piece different stuff together. So he's someone who I'm like directly building. Like I touch pretty much everything he does, whether it's a mix on a feature verse or the music that we're doing right now. I'm heavily involved with that stuff, which is great. I just played a show actually recently with him. They had this show called Everything Is Punk, which is like a, I guess it's, I don't know if it's a brand, but it's like a just this type of show that's put on by this guy Tommy, who's another one of our main artists I work with, Tommy Richmond. And so we had a show this past Saturday. So those two are like the main peer artists that like I'm working with directly. Let's see. I've actually been taking a little bit of a pause on sessions, to be honest. Because I feel like I'm at a point where I'm trying to like sort of figure out the next workflow. I feel like I've had seasons of like
Right.
doing a bunch of samples and then being like, I need to have sessions, and then doing a bunch of sessions and then being like, I need to do samples and then doing a bunch. So I've been trying to find like the
I'm the same
balance.
way. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So I haven't really been doing a lot of sessions recently. Like I think towards the end of the year, I was like mixing a bunch of stuff and like trying to wrap some things up. And yeah, but My Name Isn't J-Mac and Tommy are probably the main, close homies that I like work with the most consistently. And then people here and there come by the studio or we set something up, or hey, I'm in town. We know this person, friends of friends, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's been good. And then even like a lot of producers, like I'd say I have a lot of producer sessions too. Like I just enjoy that. So having producers over to just cook up some melodies to send around, or, whether that's bringing in a keys player who maybe doesn't really produce like I do, but like I can bring them in and they can do their thing, and, all kinds of
Hmm.
different settings. Like there's this guy, Miles Sweeney, who we have an unreleased thing with Tommy that is like one of the best things I've ever made. But like we co-produced it together, and he did these crazy keys parts. So even just like bringing in session players to like make a melody, and a lot of it is like you never know where it's going to lead. Like I had one day, Miles comes in, I was jamming on an idea, bossa nova chord progression early that morning, inspired the jam that me and him did, which then turned into the sample that I finished, showed Tommy. He was like, let's fucking make that shit turn into a beat. Miles comes back, adds to it. So I think LA is really cool in terms of everyone that's around can collaborate so easily, and like work can be done so easily. So yeah.
And people get it too. Like in my city, I always talk about. I mean, it's a lot of cities. It's like there's so much talent here, but people aren't as exposed to the idea of collaboration, especially to the extent that people in LA might do it. Or I haven't been to Atlanta, but I assume, it's a similar vibe. So that is a key component of things for sure. Talk to me a bit about the engineering side. That's something where, mixing vocals is something I started learning about 3 years ago. And it was just because I had to. I was starting to develop an artist, and it's the same. Like, I went in, I was like, oh yeah, it'll be, a couple YouTube tutorials, I'm good, like I'll be fine. And it ended up being like our first session he came in, and I was like, I was trying to teach him how to do like, he was a great singer, but the lyrics weren't like he couldn't come up with his own flows or lyrics. It was always just covers that he could sing incredibly well. So I was trying to help him on that side with the, flowing on beats and stuff. But at the same time, I'm sitting there on Pro Tools for like the third time ever. And I'm like trying to figure out everything. And it was just, huge learning curve. Anyways, we've come a long way since. But I wouldn't say plateaued. I haven't really tried to like push to the next level. I have this like couple vocal chains that I have, couple mastering chains that I have just for myself and the artists I work with. And I'm good right now on that front, but I know I'm plateauing in a sense because I'm not pushing to that next level. In terms of engineering and vocal engineering, and I'm sure it's a lot different the way that you're doing it now, because you've been doing it for so long. What kind of tips can you give? I'll just say producers, but really anyone that's trying to get into that side of things and learn vocal mixing, and learn how to go about that whole process. And also just the mastering thing too. I'll ask about that after too, but obviously mixing and mastering is a totally different process. My mastering chain is just something I picked up off YouTube and just got, that worked, and I needed it at the time. So it's worked for what it is. But can you give us some insight on those processes?
Absolutely. Alex Toomey. No. Everything I know is from Alex Toomey. So basically similar thing. I had artists that I wanted to work with. I had some beats. I was like, actually, if you don't mind, I'm going to add a little prologue to this story. So basically, my homie John, right, when I was talking about getting into production earlier on, I was a musician first. My homie John trained him. He did a lot of production for this artist, Kate Bollinger. She's like a fire indie artist out of Charlottesville, Virginia. And he would have me come in, and he was everything. He produced, he engineered her. He was doing vocal engineering before I ever even thought of doing it. And so I'd show up, I'd play records with them. He'd engineer, he'd mix any sort of productions that I was co-producing with him. He would be tracking the vocals. He would be mixing the vocals. I leaned heavily on anything I was doing musically with him. And it was great. We had a couple records. We had one that did over 1 million. I was like, oh my God, this is wild. Like, what? This is nuts. Like, oh, maybe I actually could do this or whatever. And like, got pretty excited about all of it. But for one reason or another, logistically, like, I'd played a couple shows with them in New York. And eventually my role in that particular camp, still really good friends with John. I mean, I made some shit with him like recently in Richmond, like still super close, but I just was not involved with that particular project or group of people after like a few months, because it just didn't work out. I was in one city, some of them were in Charlottesville, some of them were in Richmond. Like, it just didn't work out. But when all of that got pulled out from under me, it was like a real moment, because it was like, okay, I was leaning super heavily on my friend who knew how to engineer, knew how to mix, or at least what I believed to know how to mix, knew how to produce. All I really was doing was playing guitar. And it was a real moment of like, okay, do you just want to like play guitar and be a session guy? Or like, if you want to do that, you got to learn, you got to do that. Like, you've been leaning on this other guy who knows how to engineer, who knows how to mix, who knows how to do all this stuff. And you've kind of just been jumping in to like do a couple chords here and there. But like, if you really want to pursue this, like you best figure the fuck out. And so it was the best thing that could have happened, honestly, in hindsight. At the time, it was not fun. I didn't enjoy it, but it was the thing that sort of like sparked me to go like, no, I'm going to figure this out. Like, I'm going to go learn how to mix. I'm going to go dive deep into the tutorials. Kenny was starting his stream in like 2020 because of COVID. And he was talking about how like, or I mean, even before that, actually, I think I used to watch like the 5-hour IG live compilations on YouTube of Kenny's like IG live streams or whatever. And like, I was like soaking up all that game and like, being like, oh, like he engineers, like because he engineers, he can do this and da da da. And I was like, oh, okay, now like I'm gonna go dive into this. And he would talk about Alex Toomey was the guy that he learned all of his engineering from. So I was like, well, shit, if this is helping Kenny, let me go to the source. And that same thing applies in music. Like as a musician, just as a side note, like don't study your idols, study your idols, if that makes sense. So it's like in this instance, Kenny was using Toomey to like learn how to mix, and Kenny was a big inspiration for me. So I was like, fuck it, like if he says Alex Toomey's fire, like let me go find some, Alex Toomey streams. And I made my first template off of the old Periscope that Toomey put up on Twitter, like in 2015 or some shit. And it's like his phone's going like this and he's like showing the laptop screen and you just hear the fan and he's in his like apartment. And like I literally learned to mix from that video because Kenny said he learned to mix from that video. And then May did a bunch of streams. I watched a bunch of those, got my notebook out, taking notes on different plugins, what different stuff does, just trying to pick up anything I could. And I didn't really know what it was, but I was just trying to soak it up, And like, if you told me, like, do you know how to mix? You're like, I don't fucking know. Like, I'm trying. But, watching Josh Goodwin streams, like, those were the two. Josh Goodwin did some streams. He was like Justin Bieber's engineer, and watching his process. And then Alex Toomey and watching his process and sort of taking a little bit from both. Like I found out about Plugin Alliance from Josh. I found out about, busing and aux and how to set up a Pro Tools session from Alex. Like I literally just like forced myself because I was like, no one else is going to teach me. I'm not going to school for this. Like, and again, I much more prefer the teacher, right? Like you could learn mixing on YouTube, but why learn mixing when I could just go to Alex Toomey's stream? Like it seems ridiculous to me to go on YouTube and be like, how to mix a vocal from some random person. And like all respect to those guys, do your thing. It's probably valuable to a lot of people. But the way that I've learned has been taking a course from Waves that then resulted in learning stuff, meeting people, taking a course from Resky, taking a course from Al Hug, taking a course from Mario Luciano, studying Alex Toomey from all the free material he puts on Twitch. Like he literally mixed an entire album. He's like, this is $100,000 education that I put out for free on Twitch if you want to take it.
That's crazy. I didn't even know about that, bro. I'm not going to lie. That's insane.
Like, he went from beginning to end, from prepping a session to final mix, all shown on stream. And he's like, you would pay $100,000 at Full Sail to get this level of depth and like from beginning to end project. And he's like, here, like it's all out there. It's just knowing the people and like taking that next step of like, where could I learn it? I don't know. Like, oh, Kenny talks about this guy, Alex Toomey. Who's Alex Toomey? Let me go look into Alex Toomey. And like sort of following the breadcrumbs until you get to certain information. Like I remember watching a stream where Alex Toomey just like very casually was like, mixing is just like leveling, EQ, and midside. And then just like keeps going. I was like, what the fuck's midside? Like, you know what I'm saying? And then I like go dive in and like he literally said most three important things in mixing is leveling, EQ, and midside. Like clearly I got to figure out what the fuck that is. Like if it's in his top three, like, and I don't know what it is, like, let me go find out. So then I start researching midside. I'm like, oh, Pro Q3, you can EQ out just the mid of a frequency and like make space for the 808 and the kick and the low end, or maybe you just take out the mids of like the 1K range to let a vocal pass through the center, and like all these like little stuff these sort of start to piece together. But yeah, the source I think is, if I had to sum all of that up, it's always the source of where you're getting it from and trying to find the best source. And whether you got to pay for that or it's free, the source is going to be the biggest thing that gets you from point A to point B quicker, more efficiently, with the right stuff. Like you could save 5 years of running in circles just from spending $300 on a production course. Like Mario put me on the path. Like I talk to people all the time about courses and like, are they worth it? And what'd you learn? And it's like every course that I've taken was the exact right course that I needed in that moment, because there is no other way. Like, would I get more out of Mario's course now than I did when I took it because it was my first one? Fuck yeah, I would. But he told me what I needed to know then. I got me on an Apollo, got me off the Focusrite, started learning different stuff. Like, each person has like given me exactly what I needed in that moment to set me on the path to just keep progressing and not like get lost over here for a year or two, not knowing what I should be doing, not knowing what I should be working on. Like, I really do feel like people, whether it's courses, Twitch streams, like, you can really expedite things, or at least get things into overdrive, so to speak. If you can get some of that valuable information in that game. And we're at a time where like you don't got to go to college to do this shit. You feel me? Like, I can literally go on Twitch and spend $5 on a sub and watch every VOD and just dive in. And like, if you're self-starter and like, you know where to look, like, you can get the information. And having the, asking, like, people who ask me stuff, like, I'm an open book. If people want to ask, I'm not going to go out of my way to like give a whole bunch of stuff, but like, be comfortable saying, hey bro, like, I know you're really good at this. Like, would you mind showing me XYZ? And if it's in a nice manner and it doesn't seem like you're like asking for too much, like, people are always down to help, I think, or at least in my experience. So like, being comfortable asking for stuff, asking for information, asking for sources. I'm always down to, like, you need a book on XYZ, I will give you that recommendation. You need a sound pack on this or that, I will try and help you and give you drums or point you in the right direction. Like, I am willing to share the knowledge, but you also got to be willing to ask for it.
You know what? I completely agree. And that point about like just being comfortable asking, I think there is this idea, and I think there's many different factors. Part of it is that there are a lot of producers that kind of sit behind the screen there, and that does, socially kind of bring them back a little bit, and maybe they're not as comfortable. And also just there is like a side of this online producer community that can be very negative. And I think like if you kind of are exposed more to that, or you see more of that, then you might feel less like inclined to reach out to someone that's like a level or two above you for something simple. But in reality, like you said, in your experience, most people are down to help. It's really not like that. And I can't, it's just countless times I've had where simply asking, even there's times where I push myself where I'm like, okay, this is asking for a lot. Let's just see what happens, like the worst that's going to, people aren't going to, there's very, very few people that are going to be like that offended or upset, just learn how to ask the right way and be genuine when you're doing it. That there's really not a lot of downside to that, or there's far less downside than you might think.
100%. And if you focus on adding value of some kind, or just trying to put yourself in their shoes, right? A lot of times it isn't the ask, it's the how. It's like, maybe you asked, I'm busy, I'm gonna get to it, but then you decide to passively aggressive tweet about somebody because like, I'm just trying to make friends in the music industry, but like, I guess it's not a good look for people. And it's like, bro, we're busy. You feel me? Like, so it's like, it's both of that. It's like, be willing to ask, but also like empathize with the person that you are trying to get to, and understand that the reason that they are perceived to be farther along or they got more going on is because they're probably pretty busy and they're doing a lot of things. And just because you may not get a response right away, or you may not get the exact right thing, like, if you can keep an even cool, like, there's people that I've messaged time and time and time and time again, but I kept it polite, respectful. The way that I got my internship and part-time engineering job was through that. I call it polite persistence. Like, it's okay to be persistent, but it's not okay to be persistent and like an asshole about it, or like have this passive aggressive, like, you should have da da da. It's like, no, like, I'm just going to be respectful as I can be, and I'm not going to not follow up because I think you might be angry. No, I'm going to be persistent, but I'm going to be as respectfully persistent as I can be, so that I'm not pissed off. I'm just checking up. Hey, just checking in. I know it's been a month. How are things going? Da da da. No response, no hard feelings. I'm just going to keep politely following up and try and get what I want to happen. And if you keep it there and you never let it turn into that like resentment, passive aggression, oh, these people, whatever about me. And usually that's an ego thing. Usually that's like, you're not secure enough in yourself and you're perceiving it as them like slighting you when folks got shit going on. You feel me? Like I got people that have told me they wanted to link and we just have not yet. But it's like, what? They got stuff going on. They had an album roll out or they got this other thing or family shit or whatever. It's like, who am I to get angry that like we haven't linked yet? Like it's going to happen.
Yeah.
Like there's producers much bigger than me who have literally said, let's link, bro. And I'm like, let's get it. When? Nothing. And it's like, okay, cool.
That happens all the time.
Dude, it's like you just keep shooting your shot, keep making shit happen. But like, yeah, the passive aggression can get, that's where, you know, you start to build that like unnecessary reputation of like, as long as you're just chill and a good hang, like it's just time, bro.
Yeah, 100%. I totally agree. It's like a fundamental kind of, you know, if you can have these like positive character traits and just understand really, it's like you said, the empathy part is so big. It's something that I still, you know, I find myself getting into moments where I'm like, okay, I'm getting a little bit, like even the passive aggressive thing, when I notice I'm passive aggressive in general, like outside Twitter's so easy to be passive aggressive on, but like it's so easy. Like I find like almost everyone has like a hint of like, you know,
but it's like they show their side character. You feel me?
Exactly.
Like, I'll be like, you would never say this to someone's face. Like, what the fuck are you talking?
Exactly, man. And I find myself like when I get into these moments where I start getting a little bit resentful or bitter, like passive aggressive, even if it's slight, you know, it's you have to recognize it in yourself too. And I again, like it's just that if I can just have that empathy, because then I find myself on the other side of that equation often. You know, often enough, like I haven't had the experiences that some of these really big producers have had. You see some of these DMs, you're like, holy, like, you know, someone reaches out with the kindest message, like, hey man, like would love to learn this from you or whatever. But obviously they're asking a lot at the time, guy's busy, whatever. And then they get a couple more and then like 3 months later they check back and it's like the most hateful message you could have ever put. So it's just like, I don't know, man. I've seen like little bits and pieces of it, and it's really weird to see. Like there was a guy recently. I'm not sure. There could be a million reasons for this, but at least the way I pieced it together, it seems like someone that I was pretty connected with. You know, considered him a homie. Like we never worked together like that, but just always it was always love between us. And I always do this thing where I take a little bit of a break from things, and I just, you know, I have to figure things out or whatever. Do, you know, other parts of my life. And I'd taken a bit of a break, you know, came back, and I guess I didn't realize I hadn't responded to one of his messages. And then I noticed that he'd like left my server, like unfollowed me on all social media. And I was just like, I don't know if it's because of that, but I was just like, huh, like that's really interesting. Like that's just, and I felt horrible because I'm like, man, like if he knew how I really was feeling at that time, maybe he took it personal, right? But if he really knew, it was never anything personal. You know, if anything, he's one of the dudes that I've had such a positive experience with. So it really is like empathy can be a huge part of this. And especially because we're online, like I find you kind of need to extend that more because you're really not seeing the person's face, body language, life, none of that, right? And in person, it is different.
100%. 100%. And it can feel like a lot, especially before, like when Discord was even bigger. Like I feel like now that folks are outside, like people understand that like we got lives and shit. But like I remember early on when like Discord was the thing, like I've put a lot of pressure on like being in there and being with people. And it's like, if you can just dial it back and realize like life goes on, all these people will still be here. As long as you are just around and stuff, like it's not that crazy, because you can just get in your head and just get in these loops of like, oh, they think this, and it can get out of hand real quick. So I just think that, you know, if you can keep that under wraps, it'll be better. But we all have our moments, me included.
Absolutely, yeah. Talk to me a little bit about like what, at least as far as you know, and maybe the experiences you've had and how your process is. Like, let's say you mix a track. Are you doing the mastering as well, or are you sending that off to someone, or is that not really as much of a concern anymore? What's your experience with that?
If I could send it off to mastering, I would.
Yeah.
But a lot of the artists that I work with, like they really only got the budget for me to do it. I used to send off mastering, but it just didn't make sense. Like it, I might as well just do it, charge a little bit less, get it done, and move on with it. I guess at some point, if I move up in artist or we have people with a little bit of a bigger budget, like, yeah, I would love to pass it off. But for now, I'm mastering it myself. And for me, mastering is just, I've done some work, taking notes, taking some courses, free ones on YouTube in this instance. But um, it's really just a matter of leveling for me. And then like making sure that it's hitting at the right volume, maybe doing some EQ to bring out certain elements, whether it's like some mid-side boost cuts, different things, some compression, just a little bit of peak reduction, stuff like that. But a lot of it is just, trying to make the song as even as possible, hitting at the right level. And for me, it's weird because like, I think back in the day, you used to mix and then you used to master, and they were very separate processes, like
Right.
almost like by design, because mastering was related to putting things on cassette, putting things on CD, putting things on vinyl with proper levels so that the needle doesn't skip off the record. And like, there's very like material consequences to mastering that
Right.
these days, like if it's on streaming, like it's the same, it like throw a fucking limiter on there. It's obviously I do more than that, but that's effectively what it is, right? Like there is no mastering for a physical medium quite like there used to be. I mean, obviously there is now, like if you have an artist who is going to put out a vinyl, like you're going to have to go through that process. But if you're just putting shit up on Spotify or throwing stuff on DistroKid or some other boutique distributor, the mix master process is really not that different because you can get the loudness that you would get from mastering in the mix stage. And you can even get a mix almost to full level in the demo stage. Like that's where I'm at this point. Like I've been doing it long enough that like my demo mix is like pretty fucking good. Like it's almost done. Like I really am just going to do some more tweaks, but like I mix as I engineer a lot of times, at least on my sessions. And like there's one song I got with Tommy that's like that. I played it for Resky in a lesson, and he's like, "Bro, it's done." Like, what do you mean this is a demo? I was like, this is the first bounce. Like, he's like, master that shit, send it off. Like it's done. Don't touch it. And so it's hard to even think about it on some level because unless you're really intentionally separating them as distinct processes, they kind of blend together. So for me, it's more of like, where is the finish line? And at any point, I may be closer or farther from that line, but I don't really think about it as like engineering, mixing, mastering. I do because it helps. And I might have different projects where I am a different role. Like if I'm with J-Mac and Tommy, I'm engineering, mixing, and mastering. So for me, as long as I know where I am on that timeline, we'll get to the finish line and I'm not worried about it. Then there's other projects where I'm just recording and I send off the stems. And so it doesn't matter. It's going to another mixer. Or I'm the mixer and mastering and I didn't engineer it. And in that case, I'm starting a little bit farther along in the process and just dropping stuff into Pro Tools. And then there, it's a little bit more separate for me. So it really just depends on who I'm working with. But a lot of it is just sort of like, I know where the finish line's at. As long as we get there, we'll get there. And sometimes it's not so separate.
You know what? That is what I was looking for, bro. I'll be honest. Like even when you mentioned like the idea of mixing and doing all this stuff as you're recording, that's just kind of how it's come out to be. That's exactly how my sessions have been going. And so I'm glad to hear that there's, other people like I just haven't, maybe I haven't done enough like, research on it, but to hear that that's how it's being done, at least from your end at times, is really interesting and reassuring.
No, the reassurance is sweet, bro. I ain't gonna hold you because a lot of us are in these rooms by ourselves. We kind of know what we're researching. We're kind of watching the same stuff. We're sharing the sauce with everybody, but sometimes you still don't know, right? It's like I do it this way, and then you find out like, oh, you do it like this too. All right, sweet.
Yeah,
cool. Because like none of it is written. Like there's no, this is how you do it. This is the blueprint. Like And it happens at all levels. Like I get to engineer for someone who, when I went in, I was like, oh, you just fuck around too? Like, all
Yeah,
right,
yeah, yeah,
sweet.
exactly.
Like
Yeah.
at the highest of levels, it's the same shit. And so it's nice when it's, whether it's peers, those farther along, you know, people around you, like when you get to see other people work, it's reassuring, you know. And that's why I also love collaborating, because you get to learn from different people's
Yes.
processes, you get to reinforce certain processes, and you get to learn how stuff's done, even if you're not even directly like being taught. Like me just engineering for my boss, I'm able to soak in his process, how he thinks about stuff, how things are going. And, you know, you can be reassured that it's like, oh yeah, we're all just making music.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, it's real. And it's so like, as you said, like you get to the higher levels. There's this clip of Rick Rubin going around right now that, you know, people are kind of like memeing, but he basically started talking about how paraphrasing heavy here, but how he doesn't know shit basically.
Yeah.
And it's so funny that people are like, nah, like this guy, this, that, like they've got so many opinions on it. And it's like, man, you know, he's at that level for a reason. It's interesting to hear that. And also like there are so many people, it's almost like the higher they get, the more they realize they don't know anything. And that's kind of the point. Like that's a part of the freedom of it.
And they lean into that.
Exactly. And it's so freeing. That's like, and especially I find, you know, I'm sure at that higher level, because it's so easy to get, I've fallen for this, like other people for sure. As you get higher, you might feel more pressure and more like, oh, I'm in the studio now with this person, or I'm doing stuff for this, or there's more people, more eyes on me. I have to be very careful in how I, you know, but in reality, once you even, it's almost like they hit that transcendence level where it's like, oh, you know, none of this, I don't know anything. And it just frees them from everything. And that's why they're able to create like some of the most game changing music ever.
And you get to collaborate more easily with each other, because if you fully relinquish yourself, you know, I'm not religious, but I would consider myself spiritual to some extent. But if you subscribe to the idea that, you know, I am not making this music, somewhere this is being channeled. And if you can get out of the way of that and just tap in, where you're not thinking about what you're playing, you're just feeling it, you're connected to whatever the source is. If you have multiple people that are in that realm, you can so easily collaborate, because there's no super attachment to any one idea. It's not like this idea is me and I need to put this in the thing. It's all this bigger feeling of like, does this fit? How does this feel? What does this sound like? And you're not super attached to any one idea, any one instrument, because you're just in search of this larger thing that, you know, we're coming together to put. But there's not any, you know, higher pressure to keep this idea or that idea. It's all in service of this bigger thing. And I think that people that are collaborating on that level all kind of understand that and are comfortable enough within themselves to be like, yeah, no, that's cool, or that's not cool, or this is fine, or that's fine. Because
Yes.
the worst collaborating experiences I have are when people are constantly like, not arguing. I don't know if you've experienced this, but like where you just can't get on the same page because you do one thing and they're like, no, I don't want it like that. And then you're trying to, and I don't want it like that. And it's like, can we just find this together? Can we like just not like stop this process? Like we can always take stuff out. We can always change stuff around. Like let's just get the ideas going before you fucking shoot it down. And I think people that really know and have been doing it for a while, they understand that it's a moldable process. And like, just because I lay down this baseline right now does not mean that that's the fucking baseline. We could change it at some point, but let's just let the flow keep going. Like, don't stop the flow. That's the biggest thing in rooms. Don't stop the flow. You know what I mean? And it's like, whether that's coming up with ideas, whether that's looping a section for an artist to try and write to, whether that's keeping stuff going, like, don't stop the flow while creating is like super key. And
Bro,
that even turns into workflow shit too, by the way.
That's real, bro. That's so real, because so I had a session where I went to Toronto to visit one of my homies. I mean, it's a bit of a longer story, but essentially, I had an artist here that I'm developing. His name's Bali. A lot of love for him. He's super early on in his career, but we went to Toronto because I wanted him to just. We'd been working, me and him in the studio. That's all we'd be doing. So, and there's not a lot in Ottawa in terms, like I said, that open collaboration. So I was like, all right, man, we have one of our homies down there. He has a studio at his school and he's been working a lot. He's been learning a ton of engineering. Like the guy just crazy how much he learned in 1 year. So or a couple years. So we went down and I told my homie beforehand that worked in the studio, I was like, yo, you know how I work? Like my workflow, at least in this artist development stage where they're still learning, is just like you said, go with the flow, go with the feel, but also like speed is a big, maybe flow is the word that I'm looking for, but speed is a component of that.
Flow allows for speed.
Yeah. There you go. Okay.
It's like a byproduct, in my opinion. It's like if you relinquish yourself to the flow, you will end up speeding things up. And I have more to add, but keep going.
Yeah. And I'll let you 100%. So essentially what happened, because I told him, this is our first time. It's going to be me, him, and a few others in the studio. Like, let's start off with, how I do things. Let's do it this way first, or try it. Don't knock it right away. Like, how I do it. Because the reason I was doing this is because I knew how him.
And you're telling this to the engineer or to the artist?
No, to the engineer. The artist already kind of knows how it works, and I told him beforehand too. I was like, look, when we go there, it might be a little different than we normally do things, but I'm gonna try and draw that balance. And really, what it was though was I just knew that his the folks that he works with there, they focus a lot on like the details and that's super key, of course. So what I didn't want is that flow to just not happen at all or stop, because getting started and then keeping it going is a part of it, right? So we got there, and long story short, like I was really just because the producers started to work on stuff, right? I think they started playing stuff without me first, like, which was cool. Like I was there mainly for the artist experience, being in the studio with other people. So they start working, but they start really like taking their time, and I'm thinking like, all right, well, we could get the vocals on this section of this melody, and like you said, there's so many adjustments we can make, but right now this artist that I have, like, he's getting mad bored, right? So I kind of brought that up, and there was already a bit of friction there from that, and I was trying to explain like, nah, like this is just try it, you know what I'm saying? Like, and even one of the guys there was like he was hesitant on the idea of recording vocals before the instrumental is like very fleshed out. So we had a bit of friction, and then the flow just it wasn't working. And at a certain point though, I realized, I was like, look, I already came, like before I even went to Toronto, I'd called him. I try to make it work try to warn him, I guess, ahead of time on how I wanted to kind of approach it. But I realized that, all right, there's one person in that room that really wasn't, one of the producers, engineers, he really wasn't like about that at all. Like my ideas, like it was immediately, you could tell he was just not with it. And he was the guy who really knew how to engineer, like use all the equipment, and knew how he was such a good, like in terms of artist development, that guy, he knew what he was talking about. So I was excited for the artist to work with him. But as much as I was there for quite some time trying to find a balance. I even let them do their thing, and I was like, all right, let me jump in, let me try my style, like, so I let him do his thing. When I went up, it seemed like there was this like kind of, he drew back, and if he draws back, because other people look up to him in the studio, everyone's energy kind of goes back. So I was like, all right, after all of that, I'm like, you know what? I realized, and there was other solutions, but I'm like, man, I'm gonna just let them do their thing, because at this point, there's nothing, like when I'm doing this, like the whole energy's dying, and I don't want that. I ended up actually leaving the session. I told the artist, I'm like, yo, we're here for you. Like, this is for you. I explained to him what was up, and he saw what was going on, but he understood that me actually leaving that session at that time and doing my own thing, I had other things to do in the city, was going to unlock something for them, right? And again, I could have sat there and just let them do their thing. It would have done probably the same thing, but I just wouldn't have been as into, why be there? So let him do his thing. And after he did, he told me, he's like, yo, it was amazing. Like, you know, we did this and this, and like, okay, we didn't get a lot done, but I learned this and this. And I was like, perfect, bro. Like, I was just glad that he got to see like the other side. And he's like, man, I do like your ideas where we just want to get shit actually done and polished, or not polished, but just out, like done. But their side where they're focusing on the details, the singing, the this, the that. So that was, I really like that you've worded it that way. And I want to hear more of your thoughts, as you said, because that's super important, I think.
Yeah. And with that workflow, I think when you decided to leave, like that's another thing about self-awareness and like being confident in yourself and your abilities and in the situation and being aware of the room and how things are flowing. And like, it's not that deep. Like, guess what? Like, you weren't like not a good enough of a producer. You weren't fucking up. You weren't like, there's people who would take that personally and be like, why don't they da 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 da? And it's like, no, like it's for the betterment of the artist or the greater good of the song or whatever the bigger thing is. Like, it's not
absolutely
who gives a fuck about my production or my whatever. Like, there's always something bigger in pursuit that we're all trying to make happen. And the fact that you were able to like recognize the situation, get a pulse on it, try some things first, but like once you realized, okay, this is how we're going to do it, like being comfortable and confident enough in making that decision for the betterment of the whole, despite what it might look like, feel like, or whatever. So like, I think that's super key. And that happens in all regards, whether that's taking a break, starting another idea. So this is something that I've learned from being around a few guys, is this idea of jumping around. So like, for example, there's a producer named TJ, who I've had the opportunity to work with a couple times. And he's someone who's like, we've only had like production well, we had one session with an artist, Danny Watts, but the other session we did was just a production session. And he likes to like get ideas out. He's like, I want to have like 3 or 4 ideas minimum at the end of a session. But instead of going 1 done, 2 done, 3 done, 4 done, it's all about the flow. So we might start an idea, and if it starts to feel stale, save, open up a new idea, start working on some stuff. Starts to feel stale, save, open up a new idea, take a break. Oh, what was that first thing we did? Oh shit, let's add a bass line. Boom, boom, boom. Oh, what was that third thing? Oh, that's just crazy. Oh, let's start a 4th idea. And you're just sort of going with the flow, and like instead of sitting on one and like ramming your head against the wall about like, what do we add next? I don't know what to add next. And it's like, stop judging it. Like, don't judge that you don't know. Like, don't beat yourself up that you don't know what to add. Don't beat yourself up that it's not done. Like, save it, open a new idea, keep working, come back to it. Because guess what? Maybe you make 2 more ideas. You come back to the first and you're like, actually, this fucking 4-string Rogue bass that we were using on the 3rd idea, that would actually be perfect for this idea. And you just keep stuff going. And I used to make like 1 idea at a time. And I've slowly started to ease my way out of that workflow into just focusing on the flow. And like, I remember yesterday morning, I spent maybe 2 or 3 hours working on stuff. And I literally took 2 jams and turned it into 9 samples just off of this method of like, oh, I'm going to take this idea. Ooh, I think I have an idea to add this synth. I don't know anything else. Okay, save that. Let me go back to the jam. Let me grab another idea. And then, you know, some of them are more developed. Some of them are just starters. But I was able to work for a 3 to 4 hour period locked in because I didn't let it stop. If I felt it stopping, I would save, pick a new idea, get re-inspired, and just keep rotating out. And everything got to different points, but I was able to get 3 solid full hours as opposed to like, you do a 90-minute and then you sit there and bang your head against the wall for 45 minutes, not knowing what to add, not knowing what to do. And guess what? Once that feeling goes, that's when the shitty music's made, because that's when you start to second guess what you're laying down. Is this the right part? I don't know about this. Like, if you stop before the uncertainty and it's all solid ideas that you are confident in, when you come back to listen to it, you're not going to be like, oh, fuck, take that shit out. Oh, fuck, like, why did we put that in there? Like, it's all solid. So if you just jump before you even get to that uncertain level and not judging whether, like, you may sit down and be like, I'm going to make 5 samples. But guess what? If you made 5 starters, that's good too. But if you set this intention that I'm going to finish a full sample today, then there's this disconnect between where you should have stopped and where you thought you should have stopped. And so figuring out a workflow that just keeps everything fresh, I think, can be super beneficial, because you're able to get so much more done because you're just sort of jumping and keeping that energy, that good energy going. And it may even be like opening up a sample and being like, ooh, what if I add a perk loop? And then being like, all right, cool, save, open up this. What if I add a this? And like literally like just switching. And it's something that I've seen my boss do a bunch, and other producers that I admire and are a little farther along than I've seen them work in this way. And in the beginning, I thought it was crazy. I was like, how is your brain working like this? Like, how can you open up this
Yeah.
idea and then go to this idea and then go to this idea and like keep it all straight? And I've intellectually, it made no sense to begin with. I was like, how the fuck are they doing this? But then I've slowly tried to try it out for myself. And now I realize that the reason that they're doing it is because it keeps it fresh. They don't let themselves get uninspired, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Like they don't push it to the point where they don't have ideas. The minute the ideas start to slow down, they don't try and force themselves to have them. They just say, okay, cool, save, open. Oh, what was this? And if you don't have an idea, and you just keep jumping and attaching yourself to the stuff that you do have ideas for, and not forcing ideas just because you think you should be working on this. And that happens with artists, that happens with beats, that happens with samples. And I think a lot of it also is the setup. Like I've set my setup to be conducive to that. Like I have this mic always ready. I have the preamps solid. I have my guitar amp mic'd up. I have the synth plugged in. Just turn it on so that when I'm opening stuff and like, ooh, I want to do a vocal. Okay, boom, arm, sing it instantly. I want to do a guitar part. Boom, boom, boom. I want to do a DI. Boom. It's already ready. Like my templates, all that shit. It like helps aid in that idea to execution. The shorter you can get that, the better, because you can keep that flow going. If I have an idea for a bass line and then I'm futzing around to get cables and plug stuff in and what input is it, and like by the time I'm starting to record, that idea is gone. So it's like your whole workflow studio, to the best of your ability, if you can make it conducive to that type of workflow and the speed of executing ideas, like you'd be surprised how much music you could make. Because some people are like, how do people make all these things? Like it takes me 2 hours to do whatever. And it's like, yeah, it takes you 2 hours to do a full sample because you're starting from beginning and trying to get to the end all in one sitting. You probably ran out of ideas halfway through, and the last hour you don't even know if those ideas that you added or changed were even good. So if you just keep that good energy, I think you'd be able to make a lot more stuff, and it'll be a lot better than you might think. And you'll surprise yourself because you have an idea you started at the beginning, you saved it, you go throughout the whole day, and then you go back and listen to everything from the day and like, oh fuck, I remember this shit. This shit was crazy. Like now I'm gonna finish it. Or like now I'm gonna add this because I have been taking an ear break from it for the last 2 hours, making 7 other ideas that now this is fresh as hell. When if I had kept working on it 2 hours ago, it was stale. But it's all perspective. Like nothing is really stale or fresh. Like I'm sure you've seen this with artists. Like you'll play a beat that you think is ass, or you've heard it a bunch of times or whatever. And then because it's fresh to someone else, I thought I heard something. Because it's fresh to someone else, they're like, oh my God, this is crazy. And then you're like re-excited about all of it. And so I think it's a lot of that, where it's just like, try to like be aware of your feeling towards the music and just keep it fresh and go with the flow. And if someone else feels like it's time to switch, unless you have a solid idea, like go along with it. Like, let's switch ideas. Let's do it. Like, be willing to compromise with the collaborators so that for the greater good of the session, like, don't let your ego get in the way and be like, oh no, we got to finish this or whatever. Like, just let it flow.
Great answer. And even like exactly what you said, one of the things that you touched on is like this idea of creating without expectation. I heard it, I saw it written by Nick Mira. He's one of my favorites. Just because I saw like everything the dude did, like day to day, year to year, and how he built everything, and it's so cool to me. Even him, like I don't remember or maybe it was on my, I don't know. I put out a tweet a while ago that was like controversial, let's just say. And it was about creative block. And I was talking,
Stir
I
the
could have
pot.
definitely, yeah, exactly. Yeah, I could have worded it differently. And I also, my thing in writing that tweet, it was so funny, but like, my idea behind that tweet was, oh, this is my first Twitter thread. Let me make it a little obviously valuable to the producers. I just had a sample pack drop, which honestly had nothing to do with me writing. I was gonna write that tweet anyways, but I was like, oh, I could, like, people promote their stuff at the end of threads. I could do that, but anyways. So I write this thread on creative block, and I should have clarified more, but essentially it was targeted towards newer artists and producers. Like, I find that a lot of them get caught up in, they almost rely too much on their like feeling, which I believe in it, and everything you said I agree with because I do it. But what I mean to say is, like, they don't actually end up finishing anything ever, and a lot of the time, sometimes, like, getting over that obstacle of like, man, I'm like stuck. I feel like and maybe that does mean taking a break or taking a step back, but sometimes if you just push a little bit, you can unlock a whole new like creative, side of things, or the side of the song or sample that you didn't even think you could. Like, it's happened to me multiple times. That's the only reason I even put it out there. But it was important for me to have those moments earlier on where I push through these creative blocks rather than just like take the break, because it shows you you learn so much in that, right? And of course it won't work every time, but there are lessons to be had within that. But anyways, so this tweet goes, it's not viral, but it was like it was semi-viral to the point where, people were like, they had some strong opinions on
Chiming in.
Oh yeah. And but one of the things that Nick Mira said, which I appreciated, because he wasn't like super it wasn't like he was saying anything about my tweet or anything. He just said, oh, I just create without expectation right now, and that's how I get past, or that's how I avoid maybe he just said create without expectation, I don't know, but it just stuck with me, and it kind of unlocked something for me too in that moment. I was like, yeah, that makes sense, and if Nick's doing it, like, I should definitely be looking into doing that, right? One last thing I wanted to touch on, or maybe not the last, but the definitely a thing I want to make sure we address is the Kingsway. I didn't expect, like, I didn't know, because with Gemini's pack, like, I feel like they'd been taught, I'd seen like rumbling, like, ramblings of it in the Discord, and like, I couldn't even tell if they were fully joking or not, or what. And then I was off Discord for a while. Maybe they did the same with your pack, but next thing I know, I didn't expect to see a John Wehmeyer Kingsway. So tell me how that came about. And the process of tell me how it came about, the process, whatever you want to talk about, but I definitely want to hear about it.
For sure. So yeah, the Kingsway John Wehmeyer Volume 1 came out, like, I guess December of last year. So it's been a little over a month, maybe. But yeah, I had wanted to do a pack, I think before I moved, I was doing a lot of production, some samples, had taken some courses, had a desire, like, sometime in the future, it would be cool to have a pack on
Right.
Kingsway or Minta Foundry or Polyphonic or whatever. And so it was always like a desire at some point. I didn't know how. And usually that's how all these things work. You don't really know how. You just have this thing that is in the front of your mind, and like, you're just working towards it, and you don't really know the path, but you're kind of you're putting it out there into the universe. You're talking about it. So it had been something that I wanted to do. I had taken all these different courses, had been improving my samples. I think sending stuff around is a very important thing to getting better. So before sending stuff around, my samples were not it. Once I started sharing and sending stuff and collaborating, I was like, oh, you could do this, and there's this technique and whatever. So sending stuff around and just getting feedback on, like, people telling me that my samples sounded like starters, and I was like, what does that mean? And, oh, it's because they're talking about library samples, or like more developed, and what is a library sample versus a sample that might be just placed on a record. And like hearing Al Hug say, like, yeah, this is like my library level samples, but like, these aren't the samples I'm sending to Qbeats, or this isn't, I'm just picking random names. I don't know who he's sending to.
Yeah.
But, but like, there's a different type and level of sample in terms of how developed it is. Like there's a sample that I sent to Mike Hector that he flipped. It was like 2 guitars and a vocal. And I, in my mind, was like, I don't know if whatever. And it's like, that would never be on a library pack. But Mike flipped it and it could be a record potentially. So it's like, there's different levels of samples. And so once I figured that out, then I was like, okay, if I do want to do a pack, these are the type of samples I'm going to need to do. And I'm also going to enlist the help of those who I've been in contact with. For example, Al Hug, I took his course and I've maintained a relationship with him over time. And so when I was going through this process of like, I want to do this, one, just having it in my mind so that when the time arose that I had like a chunk of free time, like I was interning for a minute and then all of a sudden I had like a month off. And because I thought I was going to start working, but then like he went on vacation for a minute. And so I was like, well, this is as good a time as any. So then I just started and I'm going to try and make this more clear. I feel like I'm all over the place. But
No, you're
basically,
good, man.
I had the idea and it was just this thing, right? These things that over time are just there, they're just there. And then the time arose and I was like, oh shit, okay, now's the time. How can I do this? In the past, I mentioned that sending stuff out was great, but sending stuff out was also bad because anything I made eventually, once I started sending stuff, anything I made got sent. So when it came to wanting to do a pack, I never had stuff that was for a pack because I was always sending, which
Right.
on one hand was good because I was getting better and I was getting feedback and I was making doper shit. But on the other, when it came time to wanting to put a pack together, I didn't have any material for the pack because it had all been sent out. So once I had the time to do so, I basically created a folder called Kingsway. And for a week straight, for 2 to 3 hours every morning, I created without expectation and just made ideas and saved them in this folder, saved them over the course of 2 weeks. It was like the end of May last year to like the first week or two in June. And it was like a 2-week period. Like 90% of the pack was made in like this 2-week period of me sitting down, ideas, bounce, save it. Don't bounce it, rather. Save the project into this folder. And I didn't bounce anything. I didn't even bounce it for myself. So it also made it, I wanted it to feel special on some level, right? Like
Right.
nobody was hearing it. Nobody knew about it. If they did hear about it, they were in my studio. I wasn't listening to it in the car or out and about or at home or whatever. The only time I could hear the samples were in my studio. The only people who could hear it were people that had come to my studio. I was not telling anybody about it except for my close friends. And I remember having a session with certain people like Waves, who's like, you should do one. And it was always in the back of my head. And then Harper Gordon was like, you should do one. Let me know. Like my manager's involved in helping get all that across the finish line. Like whenever you've got it, like, let me know. And so I kind of was working on it. And I got like 80 to 90% done. And then for 2 months, I did nothing. and almost died, bro. Straight up. Like it was one of those times where I'd waited long enough where I almost didn't like it anymore.
Wow. Yeah.
And I was like, and then I was like, no, dude, like I literally set aside the time. The pack is damn near here. My original plan was to make like 40 ideas and then whittle it down. But then I did a class with Wawa James and Waves for like Waves' students. And I told Wawa this and he was like, bro, just like you have the pack. Like, what do you mean make 40 ideas? Like you made 16, like just make that the pack. If it gets accepted, then guess what? You can do more. Like why do more when you could just do it? And I was like, right. That's me like setting up arbitrary shit to make it more complicated. Like I have the pack, like I should just submit it. Back to the idea and execution. Why make 40 samples when you could just make the pack and submit it and get the feedback of like, did it work? Did it not? So once I did that, I sort of sat on it for a minute and then I was at work one day and I engineer for Ging. So he basically was like, yo, like, do you have any stuff?
I didn't know that. By the way,
yeah.
that's huge information.
Yeah.
And is that how you pronounce it, bro? I feel like I've asked people close to him and they've, no disrespect to them.
No. Ging. Yeah, Ging.
Ging. Okay.
Yeah. Formerly Frank Dukes. So basically I was in there one day and he was like, yo, like you got like, basically it somehow came up that like he was encouraging me to do a pack, but I'd never like found the time to show him or whatever. Like it just back to what I was talking about before. Like I let things play
Mm,
out. I let things take their time. Like I wasn't going to jump on that. So I kind of just like let it play out. But it ended up coming up in conversation. I was like, well, actually, you know what? I do. This was like 2 months after I had sort of taken a break from it. I was like, I actually do have like a pack. And he's like, send it to me. I was like, oh shit. Like I thought I was going to get to like show him for feedback. But it was good because it put my back against the wall of like, all right, well, I guess I got to finish this. So then for the next week and a half, I like sat down, it was like mixing it, finishing it up. I had 12 samples and then I ended up passing it off to the Kingsway manager and they really enjoyed it. And they're like, most people don't get it on their first try. These are great. We really like it.
wow.
We need a few more to round it out. But we like this, get back to us in a couple weeks with, the rest of them and we'll keep it moving. So I had originally done 12 and then I did 3 more to round it out to a solid 15 and then, went through the process with Josh and Rob and they really helped, facilitate and get, everything taken care of in terms of artwork and paperwork and all that kind of stuff. But
Mm,
I was glad that it like I took it to the finish line. It's something I wanted to do for a long time. I would love to do more of them actually, but it had sat there and I guess I just needed a little bit of a, prod of like, hey, you got this? I was like, yeah, actually I do. And then I got it rolling and took it to the finish line. Cause sometimes that happens where you're just like, let something sit, and you just need a little jolt to take it to the end. So that's kind of how
yeah.
it happens.
Yeah, and I do find that a lot of times with music and maybe other creative endeavors too, but music, like that last 10%, a lot of people get stuck on, maybe not even stuck. It's not even like, oh, I'm stuck. It's just that last 10% just doesn't get done for like whatever reason for whatever amount of time. But I'm really glad that you were able to get that, sorted. And also that the fact that they, even because I have heard of other people that submitted and then they'd get feedback like, hey, these are fire, do this, or maybe try and refine this. But the fact that they were, you sent yours and it was like, yeah, no, just add a couple more. When it comes to like, when you were creating these samples, was there any sort of focus on creating a cohesive, I don't want to say story, but like, are they interrelated samples in a sense? Or is it just I'm gonna just make whatever's fire right now and what sounds good to me and keep it in?
So I think it's both of that. I think it is, I'm going to make whatever sounds fire and I'm going to keep it to that. But I think because of the constraints of instrument and time, it was a cohesive body of work because
Ah,
80 to 90% of it was made in a 2-week period. Yeah, it took me months to mix or flesh things out or fix arrangement. And actually, basically, I made a chart. This is back to the library level samples, right? You could make a fire sample, but a lot of these
mm-hmm.
library level samples, like they have melody, chords, ear candy, texture, arrangement solid, mix. So like there's all these sort of different categories that when I had showed some people, particularly Al Hug, who I
Right.
asked for feedback on it. Like I sent him my original like 12 and he gave me feedback and I sort of laid out this chart of every sample that I had and all of those different categories and maybe one or two others. And I would go back in and I'd be like, oh, yep, see, this one doesn't have a strong enough melody. Like I need to either take some of this ear candy and bring it out in the mix and make it a main melody, or maybe there's too much ear candy, or maybe there's not any, or maybe the mix is not right. And so I sort of refined it over time, but a lot of it was made in that 2 weeks in terms of the idea generation. So it was cohesive from a time perspective. And then also instrumentation, I wasn't using a lot of VSTs, so I didn't have, I mean, I think the main VST I used was maybe Mellotron on a few
Mm-hmm.
things, but for the most part, it was all of these instruments in here. So because these were the instruments and it was made in that time, by definition,
Right.
I didn't intend for it to be cohesive, but it was cohesive because of the limitations of instrumentation and the time in which I was making it. I was using a lot of the similar techniques. I was using a lot of the similar like filtering stuff. And so I think
That
if you
makes
can,
sense.
but I finished it later, you know what I mean? But if I had been
Right.
working little by little by little over time, then you kind of have to worry about like, okay, does this one work with this and this one work with this? But it ended up being pretty cohesive naturally just because a majority of it was made in that time. The 3 that I added, I went back and like thought about, okay, so for these 12, like what would be good? And from that perspective, I had to sort of fit those into the cohesion. But the cohesion was kind of already there from the initial 12, just by virtue of the fact that they were made in a 2-period week of time with all the same instruments for the most part, just different versions of it, whether it's steel string or nylon or electric bass or upright bass or acoustic bass. Those were kind of what made it cohesive.
Absolutely. That makes sense. And when you're talking about like the difference between starters and library samples, or the ones you're sending out versus, can you kind of give us an insight as to what those differences are?
Yeah. So for me, the library samples are like compositions. Like they've got arrangements. There's things dropping in and out. There's big section changes. There's often, a lot of instrumentation. And I would say even my library samples tend on the lesser complicated side. Like if you listen to some of my samples, like there are sections where it sounds like there's only 2 sounds, which is probably uncommon for a lot of people's packs. But mine is, I was always focused on contrast. And so like if I wanted it to be less, like I'd let it be less. But I would just say it's the level of completion. Like you're
Okay.
refining the library level samples to a point in which you don't need to do for other things, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Like it might
Mm-hmm.
have the same amount of instruments, but for me, the library level stuff, like you're refining it, you're mixing it, you're taking out parts, you're changing this, you're changing that. Whereas if I'm just sending ideas to another producer, like I would rather get him 10 ideas that are 60% of the way there,
Mm-hmm.
because chances are he might add a melody. He might add a bass line. He might add drums and a bass line. He might add other stuff. Like I just need something that's inspiring to make a beat. Um, so I don't necessarily have to take it all the way. Whereas the library level packs are really a showcase of skill on some level, and you get to kind of do your thing, like go crazy. Like that is the format to do it, if that makes sense. Um, and they're supposed to be records for the purpose of sampling, basically, samples, but records really, that are being sampled. And so for me, it's like there is a distinct difference. It's a gradient for sure in terms of like where one starts and the next one ends. But I think sending out to people, I tend to be less worried about how developed something is, because you're just trying to get people ideas and get stuff out there consistently. But with the sample library stuff, it's for sure, more developed, more thought out. I've had like 7 different versions of a sample, trying different arrangements. What if we start with everything at the beginning and then drop to nothing? Or what if we build up the arrangement? Or what if we, add a whole different section? Or maybe we layered a bunch of things here, and then we take the 4 things that we added and we put them in a second section, so it's not at all related to the first idea that we built all of this on, and now it sounds like a whole new world because
Mm.
we've taken away that original source. But you know all just sort of playing, messing, moving things around. I think it's just a level of refinement that the library level samples are just a little bit farther along the gradient of the idea from like a single instrument starter or even a one shot, right? And then, a sample that's got a few parts. A lot of my samples people say is starters, but that's still kind of in this realm. And then you get to like the library samples where it's like full compositions. You're on this journey. And I think it's just, yeah, that's just how I see it, at least.
Awesome. No, I appreciate that clarification. Honestly, man, we hit all the points that I wanted to. I have a bunch of notes written down. I'm sure there's more we could touch on, but there's plenty of time for more episodes. But is there anything you wanted to touch on? And of course, like I'll have your links in the description, etc. And you're welcome to promote whatever you want to promote, but the floor is yours for that.
Sweet. There's nothing particularly that I'm trying to promote. If you want to check out the website or any of my socials, um, they're going to be in the comments, but John Wehmeyer _ on all socials, and then johnwehmeyer.com. If you just want to check out what I got over there. I'm going to hopefully be working on a new Kingsway at some point. So look out for that. And then otherwise, just trying to work on some more records, get more records out, continue to build up the studio around here, and just work on dope records, work with dope people. Feel free to hit me up. I'm open to, always hearing different ideas. So if you want to reach out and send starters or samples or ask questions, I'm pretty open to it. I try to get back to everybody if I can. But yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to come on. It was fun chatting.
Absolutely, man.
But otherwise, yeah, that's it from my end.
Yeah, man. No, it was a pleasure. These answers were super, like, just exactly. I shouldn't even say answers. The conversation was super insightful. Just tons of gems. I really appreciate you sharing your experiences and, the lessons you've learned from your experiences. I'm super excited to share the episode. For your information, it's coming out this upcoming Monday.
Sweet.
So now that I'm being more consistent with the actual uploads to the podcast, because it's so funny, like the first year, if you go back, the first episode was posted like 5 years, like ages ago.
A while
and
ago.
I posted, and then I posted like one the next year, like just so inconsistent. But anyways, yeah, it's dropping Monday, and I'm really excited to do the short form for this episode too, like the TikToks and the Reels, because I really do think a lot of these will be super effective in that short form, and people will pick up a lot of gems from that. So
yeah, no, man, I've been seeing you do your thing. You know what I mean? Like, it's cool to see. Like, you've taken it to another level for sure, and it's exciting to, just have the chat. I don't get to talk about this type of stuff, in this manner often. You know what I mean? Because a lot of it is the reception. Some people don't want to have these types of talks, or they're not ready to have these types of talks. But to me, these are the most. This is where this is the shit. You feel me? Like, this is where you learn the inside secrets, or what are these people doing, or how do these people feel about it, or like what did you see in this scenario, or like, I'm always back to what you're saying about like trying to learn and soak up. It's like podcasts, Twitch streams, like all of this shit is super valuable for those who are trying to glean something, figure something out. Like, something you said or I said could lead someone down the path of discovering something they wouldn't have stumbled into otherwise. Like, this is the shit. So I appreciate you having me on. I really enjoyed it.
Absolutely, bro. Thank you for your time, and I'll catch you next time for sure.
Absolutely, bro. I'll catch you soon.